Anti-Semitism in Brooklyn last night cannot happen, not in our city, not anywhere in the world. That's mayor who threatened to shut down the synagogues in New York City if
That's
they didn't
right.
abide his lockdown strictures.
About 18 months ago, I remember that.
So
Yeah.
Warren Wilhelm, virulent anti-Semites like MFer Spice, Rashida Tlaib, and Brotherly Love Spice, Ilhan Omar, calling Israel an apartheid state. Are they responsible? I'm asking the D.C. press corps for the violence against Jewish people in New York that's ongoing, like this incident. Wasim Awade, 23, held on $10,000 bail, accused of beating a 29-year-old Jewish man with crutches, punching, kicking, and pepper spraying him while he called the Jewish man a dirty Jew and said, F Israel, Hamas is going to kill you all. This is my favorite part. Awade is enrolled in college and isn't a flight risk, according to his attorney. Of course he's enrolled in college. Where would he learn this? And by the way, this is not a comment on people who are Muslim. There was a Muslim Uber driver who helped two Jewish men who were being assaulted while this mob was yelling, kill all the Jews. A Muslim Uber driver helped them, drove them to safety away from this mob. But this is another incident.
In Los Angeles, a woman's Hasidic Jew husband, he was walking home and attacked, and they were yelling Allah Akbar. And she even told Fox News over the weekend, she said, are we going to have to move? I mean, we're in the United States of America. We're in Los Angeles where everything's supposed to be, equity and inclusive. And we're fearing for our lives.
Mm-hmm. So, I just want to understand when our members of our Congress talk like the Turkish president when they provide aid and cover for a designated terrorist organization, then are they responsible for those acts of violence? I'm not suggesting they're responsible. The parties who commit the acts are responsible. But I'm trying to hold the media to its own standard when it comes to rhetoric that they don't like, even rhetoric that I would agree is excessive from the right. But then there's somehow that rhetoric is responsible for any criminal activity rather than the individual who committed the criminal activity. Always trying to search for standards. Tony Blinken, speaking of the ceasefire and the violence in Gaza, Tony Blinken, he's the Secretary of State. He was on with Clinton Foundation donor Zero over the weekend. It's one thing to advocate for a two-state solution. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu was theoretically in favor of a two-state solution. It's another thing to say what Blinken said.
Look, ultimately, it is the only way to ensure Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state, and of course the only way to give the Palestinians the state to which they're entitled. That's where we have to go. But that, I don't think, is something for necessarily for today. We have to start putting in place the conditions that would allow both sides to engage in a meaningful and positive way toward two states. If there isn't positive change, and particularly if we can't find a way to help Palestinians live with more dignity and with more hope, this cycle is likely to repeat itself, and that is in no one's interest.
For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, VP of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation and author of the recently released book, Brutal War, Jungle Fighting in Papua New Guinea, 1942. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Blinken's comments verged on nonsensical.
I think they cleared that hurdle, actually. I mean, he said Israel, it's basically two-state solution or death for Israel. That's basically what he said.
Look, I mean, the greatest obstacles to the future of Palestine are Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Fatah, Iran, the radical groups that believe that their only purpose for existence is the struggle and the destruction of Israel. So you can't say, well, we want to work towards a time when we can get to a two-state solution, when the greatest opponents of the two-state solution are Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Fatah, and they're supported by Iran, and they're in control. And what are you doing? What are you doing, Anthony Blinken? At the moment, you want to do a deal with Iran, which would flood them with more cash, so they could send more cash to Hamas to resist against Israel. You reopened aid through UNRWA, which is a thoroughly corrupt UN organization, highly partisan, highly anti-racist, highly anti-Semitic, pro-Islamist, which is funneling money to, oh my God, Hamas. And it winds up in the hands of the Islamic Jihad. These organizations are thoroughly corrupt. The people of Palestine live in misery because that's what Hamas wants. I mean, they cannot release control of the West Bank. If you were in the West Bank, you'd be happy to do business with people in Israel, make money, live in peace. Somebody from Hamas will come and shoot you in the head if you try that. So his statement is just illogical. It's literally saying that we need less kidnapping in the world by paying ransom every time a kidnapper kidnaps a child. It's just nonsense.
There was a Washington Free Beacon posted this New York Times piece from the World War II era. Actual headline, actual New York Times piece. It was, Germany and Poland both need to stop fighting. So they were sort of on equal footing. It was, both need to have a ceasefire because they're, equally guilty, equally responsible.
Yeah, look, this is the formula that failed to bring peace to the region for decades, and it's a democratic kind of belief of faith that if we are completely neutral and we support both sides, and we can be harder on the Israelis because they need us, we have a strategic relationship, that somehow we'll be able to produce peace. It didn't work for Carter. It didn't work for Clinton. It hasn't worked for. It failed for Obama. It hasn't worked for anybody. And to be honest, this administration really has no real interest in doing this. They have a domestic agenda that's way more important. They just want to get foreign policy off the front pages, and so this is their trope. On the one hand, they pretend that they're doing something. Well, we're for peace, and that placates the kind of conformist part of the wing. And on the other hand, they close their eyes and they try to ignore the virulent anti-Semitism and racism from within their own party, which is Jeremy Corbyn, which is unbelievable poison, and they just try to turn their head and ignore it and hope both those things coexist. They push through their bid to take over the federal, take over national elections, transform the economy, add on another $6 trillion of debt. This is the formula.
But do you think their stance on this is creating or encouraging Palestinians here in the United States to attack Jewish people?
Well, clearly, they have a wing of their party which is anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and thoroughly racist, and they don't really address that at all. I mean, this is. People know Jeremy Corbyn, who is the head of Labor, who is a rabid anti-Semitic, and the party just let it go as if that's not us. You can't look. You just can't do that. And what's really interesting is there's a couple of things here that just are really they're so concerned about white supremacists. I mean, these are bad groups, right? White supremacists, radical militia. Okay, fine, they're bad groups. I get that. The groups that are rioting and violent and anti-Semitic, they're just as bad as that for it, and they're on the streets right now killing people, and they're doing nothing. And the other thing is did you ever notice that the same people that are anti-Semitic and literally racist are the same people who are the number one supporter of Black Lives Matter and critical race theory? And you can say, well, how is that? Well, the answer is it's easy because they're all racist. And the problem with anti-Semitism is literally the canary in the soul's mine shaft, because it is not only against religious freedom, it's also against human dignity. It's racist and secular at the same time. It is the worst disease in the world, and it's the one disease which never goes away. Apparently, I mean, it doesn't matter what antibodies we have or what vaccines we have. It's the disease that keeps coming back, and when it sprouts in your society is in deep, deep trouble.
Two new bits of circumstantial evidence about the origins of COVID-19, and the origin being that virology lab in Wuhan. Researchers from that lab became sick enough in November of 2019 that they sought hospital care, according to a previously undisclosed U.S. Intel report. That's been widely reported. There's also this professor of economics at Peking University, a guy named Ping Chen.
Right.
He's also a senior research fellow at the Fudan University. He said recently, he's an advisor of the Communist Party. Of course he is. In 2020, China won the trade war, science and technology war, and especially the biological war. He went on to say, the failure is not only the failure of Trump's personal campaign for re-election, but the failure of neoliberalism-led globalization in the past 4 decades led by the U.S. and UK. The development and modernization model of the U.S. and Europe is not worthy of China's imitation and repetition. That after this trade war and biological warfare, the U.S. was beaten back to its original shape. After this trade war and biological warfare, the U.S. was beaten back to its original shape. How do we process those two bits of circumstantial evidence?
Well, the one thing is I do want to actually go back and link this to the last story. Is the same people who are anti-Semitic and thoroughly racist, who are enamored with Black Lives Matter, who in itself is a deeply racist organization. The founders of Black Lives Matter and their fundamental underlying philosophy, as is Antifa, is essentially Maoist.
Yeah.
They actually have the same ideology as that person that just talked to you.
Right.
And so if there's any doubt in your mind that the people in America who saying we want to build a better country with critical race theory and everything else are literally have the same ideas as the guy that you just mentioned, if that doesn't bother you, then there's something really, really wrong. Look, I don't know what this Yahoo knows about what actually happened in the lab or not, but here's what we do know, which is factual. Why people keep coming back to this. The Chinese government has never released one authentic piece of data, logs, reports, access to any of these facilities where there's any capacity whatsoever to rule out that they did wacky stuff there. And I said this on the show before, why this is so important, it's not just what did the Chinese do to us last time, but this is a part of the world where coronavirus is one of the hotspots, the global hotspots of the world. Communicable diseases that are zoonotic that jump from species to species come out of. We need to understand what happened so we can have surveillance in place next time to prevent it. And all we know for sure right now is, dude, you cannot trust the Chinese on any of this stuff. This is deeply, deeply troubling. For those of us that just lived through a global pandemic, which turned our lives upside down, the reality that as of today, this day in history, right now, we have no better capacity to be alerted to a global pandemic coming out of China than we did when COVID came out of China.
And you have this professor using the phrase, who's an advisor of the Communist Party, using the phrase biological warfare.
Yeah, there's a couple of challenges there. One is, the Chinese practice warrior diplomacy, which is a lot of just pumping up your chest and doing it to other people. But the other thing is too, I don't know if this was in English. I imagine it was in Chinese. And when you translate Chinese to English, depending on how you translate it, you get different things. So, do I think that this is a statement where they intentionally launched biological warfare against the United States? I don't think there's near enough there to make that case. And we always have to be careful about connecting the dots that we have as opposed to the dots we need to connect to really know something. I go back to what I said before. Look, China is a malicious actor which is out to bring the United States down. That comment that he made about, it's all about taking America down to size so China can grow. That's absolutely correct. It's a zero-sum game for them. Freedom, human rights, freely elected governments, free enterprise, these are obstacles to the expansion of Chinese power. All the things that we hold absolutely essential for a good society, the Chinese see as the bad things that are preventing them from doing what they want. If we don't stand up and protect those equities, nobody will. And what do we see? Not to beat on this administration, but what are they doing with China? Exactly the same kind of thing they're doing with Hamas and Iran. On the one hand, they say, well, let me wave my finger at you because you're not a nice person and you shouldn't do that. On the other hand, what are you actually doing to prevent them from doing bad things again?
Well, why don't we stop funding to the
try to give them a lot of money?
Jim, why don't we stop funding to the China's Wuhan Institute of Virology lab?
Why did
for
we
starters?
ever fund Why did we ever fund anything in China with U.S. government money with no transparency, no rules, no oversight whatsoever? Here's just a bunch of money. Please don't hurt us. Really?
And you said, I think it was you, that the director of the lab, he vehemently denies that it came from them. But now that, we're learning that they were hospitalized in 2019 of people that worked at the research lab. But if he admits that, yeah, it came from us, couldn't he be murdered by the Chinese government?
Look, I really believe the Chinese government would never let the truth of what got on the lab get out. Look, even the head of the World Health Organization said he didn't trust his own experts' report because it was not based on any real quantitative data. Look, I think the reality is we may never know what happened in that lab. And that's okay. Look, I was in the military for 25 years. Every battle you want to go into, you'd like to know exactly where the enemy is and exactly what they're going to do. You never get that. But you know it's the enemy and you know they're trying to kill you. So you do some stuff to prepare for that. How hard is this?
And the key point is that those Marxists in this country, or Maoists, if you will, believe the same things about this country. That's the incredible thing that I don't think there's been enough dot connecting for people on this side of the world. Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, VP of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation and author of the recently released Brutal War, Jungle Fighting in Papua New Guinea, 1942. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, great being with you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Oh, yeah. We look forward to the warm weather every year. It's only